and welcome back to That's Entertainment. This is a special announcement in light of Warner Media's recent move with HBO Max. For anyone who's unfamiliar, yesterday, Warner Media announced that they would be releasing all their 2021 slate to HBO Max and theaters simultaneously. This release window will be encompassing a 1-month period, after which the film will enter its normal home entertainment cycle, and theaters are therefore free to carry on working on the film as well. This announcement led to an immediate 14% drop in the stock price for AMC, and potentially represents a huge potential change to the way that the theatrical model works in the future. So we'll be just going into this in some detail over the next few minutes to describe the research that we've come across. Now, it's important to note this deal is only available in the North American market. It will not be rolling out across Europe or the rest of the world, which will be following the standard theatrical model. But it is interesting to note that companies like Sky, for instance, have the rights to HBO's content internationally, and they're represented in quite a few European markets. So it'll be interesting to see if an announcement's made that this strategy will follow in certain European countries where Sky is strong. So first off, let's look at the deal. Jason Kilar was recently interviewed by Deadline. In that interview, he strongly reaffirmed his conviction and belief in the theatrical market. He gave the reasons for the decisions that pushed Warner Media towards this decision. And it's all based around the pandemic and the uncertainty around when cinemas will open up. Remember, Warner released Tenet much to the applause of the cinema industry, but the film didn't appear to be strong enough to drive audiences back in August this year. So the argument is largely a financial one. Blockbusters require huge amounts of investment. The longer that investment sits on the shelf, the more money that film loses. And by going straight to theatrical and simultaneous release on HBO Max, the studio is avoiding the delays in the release, and will then also be able to take advantage of those cinemas that are open at that particular time, say if the pandemic continues or the vaccine fails to work. So it can be argued that studios have held the line for more than 9 months now, but it can also be viewed as the ultimate betrayal to the cinema industry. It's interesting to note that Kilar basically said that by resuming the marketing cycle, even though the film would be playing simultaneously on the HBO Max service and also in theaters, this marketing cycle will help drive awareness for the film to encourage audiences to go and check it out in the movie theaters. And this is one of the things that has been lacking from the industry, is a real investment into the marketing of bigger movies, because the bigger movies just haven't been there. In their announcements, it transpires that AMC and most of the major chains weren't informed, and neither were Legendary Pictures, the backers behind the movie. So this is a bold move by Warner, and they've basically taken their partners and suppliers by surprise. It's also interesting to note that we'll be watching what the response will be from the cinemas over the course of the weekend. There's probably be some harsh statements from AMC, as we saw earlier in the year with the debacle over Universal's release of Trolls, where eventually Adam Aron came out with a statement that no Universal content would be played in an AMC location. This was later smoothed over, and there's now a deal where there's a 17-day window with Universal and a share of the PVOD release. What's interesting with the HBO Max service is this isn't about PVOD. This is straight to the consumers of HBO Max who have a subscription will be able to watch these movies at no extra charge. So it's unlikely some kind of revenue share deal is going to be struck with the cinemas under this pretense. We're now entering a funny era, or a weird era, in the industry. Essentially, the business models are going to go even more black box than they were before. We have the theatrical reporting, and remember, a movie traditionally made about 50% of its revenue within the first month of its release, and a large part in that was due to the theatrical promotion of the film. Box office revenue is an important component of that business model. But in this new normal that we're approaching, essentially the studios aren't going to report on how the films are performing. Remember Mulan? We still have no indication from Disney as to whether or not that release was a success. We only have the critics and the fact that we know the film performed poorly even in key markets like China. So this leads us to the very important question of, how are we going to gauge success in the future? What's important to note is the leverage in the negotiation is firmly in the side of the studios. Cinemas are not in a strong position at the moment, and this is a shame. And I do feel that despite Warner's proclamation that this will only be a deal for 2021, once the bean counters run through this and this strategy is shown to make money for the studio, because remember, they don't have to share any revenue with their release on HBO Max. If it's proven to make the studio money, it's highly likely that this strategy will continue. It's also highly likely that Disney and Universal and all the other major studios are now looking at this deal and will be probably pushing to do something along these lines themselves. Because, as you know, Disney controls Disney Plus, Universal has the Comcast network. Each studio has been making quite sizable investments in their new business-to-consumer approaches. One thing is certain is that piracy is about to skyrocket. And I don't think all consumers will take the same kind of bundle subscriptions that they had with cable TV. I think, your average consumer is going to have maybe 1 or 2 services, maybe even 3, but not 6 or 7, as looks like it will be forecast and then of course you've got services like, Netflix on top of that and Amazon Prime. So this bundling doesn't make sense from a subscription perspective. I think probably what we'll start to see is more of an advertising model coming out through the streaming services as they open up their service to make them free in order to charge revenue from the ad models. So we are going back potentially to an old-fashioned TV model here. But I think the key thing is, if this works, it will continue into 2022. Anyway, here are our questions. Do you think we will see more studios coming on board with this type of model that Warner is pushing for? How will this model work across Europe and the rest of the world where studios do not have a direct-to-consumer offering? And what will be the impact on the consumer bundle of entertainment options? Do you think we're going to move more towards an AVOD model, an advertising model? Or do you think we're going to have a future where subscriptions will be bundled under packages? Feel free to comment in the comment section below on YouTube and LinkedIn. You can follow our profile on LinkedIn as well and get the rest of the company updates as we make them. Obviously, we're trying to stay on top of all these interesting changes, and there's a lot of dynamics going on in the market right now, which are going to radically change the way that films are distributed. The important thing to keep an eye on is, how are we going to measure performance in the future? And how are cinemas going to compete in this new theatrical world, where the competition will be on streaming services as well as in the box office. That's all for today. We'll be back with our normal show on Monday. Talk to everyone then. Bye-bye.